Red light discipline turned the carrier's medbay corridor into a cheap horror set. Everybody looked half dead before they even hit a gurney. The trauma lane was jammed nose to tail, condensation slick on the bulkheads, boots skidding on a wet deck, tape ripping in ugly bursts as corpsmen tried to label bags one-handed. The ship kept vibrating under my feet, a steady grind that made the cold steel rails buzz against my palms. It smelled like iodine and burned insulation and recycled air with a sharp ozone tang, like a storm trapped in a vent. The soundscape was its own enemy, hydraulic hiss, distant flight deck thunder, monitor alarms chirping and getting slapped quiet, the PA stuttering like it was afraid of its own message. My nitrile gloves were slick with sweat, salt crusted at my collar. I kept telling myself to breathe through my mouth. It didn't help coming through. Miller's voice cracked as he and 2 deckhands shoved in a litter. The operator on it was loud, swearing, fighting the straps, insisting he was fine, while his leg pumped bright through shredded fabric. Right behind him came another casualty, and that one didn't make a sound. Eyes open, not tracking, lips going grey under the red wash. Everybody's hands went to the screamer. Noise steals oxygen from brains. I'd seen it in ERs and on dirt strips, and now on a floating city of steel. I stepped into the path of the silent litter and grabbed the cold gurney rail. It vibrated against my palm. His breathing was too controlled, too shallow, like he was rationing air without knowing it. I leaned close enough to catch metal on his breath, and that iodine sting off my own sleeves. "Not him," I said, keeping my voice flat. "Roll the loud one to lane 2. I want this one now." A corpsman froze. Someone behind me snapped, "That's not protocol." Protocol didn't hear what I heard. 12 years in uniform had taught me ignoring it risked my medical license. I cut fabric and found a tourniquet, tight, placed right, and still wrong. Blood was going places it shouldn't. This wasn't a dramatic outside bleed you could see and congratulate yourself for stopping. It was the quiet kind, the kind that fills a chest and steals air, one cheap sip at a time. Leads slapped his skin. The monitor handed me numbers that looked fine if you didn't know how liars talked. His pulse wasn't racing. It was thinning, fading, like a row. A radio station sliding out of range. TXA, I said, and O negative, a cooler thumped into my hands. The tape label on the lid was grey, not the usual white, and the emboss was crooked by a couple millimeters, like the machine had hiccuped mid-stamp. I hated that my brain noticed stupid details when a person was slipping away. But that was the whole point. Stupid details killed people. I popped the lid anyway. The blood bag was tagged right type. Lot. All the comforting little boxes checked, except the timestamp. It sat a hair ahead of the corridor clock, a fraction of a second in the future. The kind of mistake nobody makes by accident when everything is being logged. The PA tried again. "All hands." Static. Then a clipped burst, like somebody keyed a mic and got slapped silent. Miller leaned in close, breath hot at my ear. "Comms are weird," he murmured. 10-second windows. Then dead comms didn't get weird by accident. Not on a carrier in active ops. A runner appeared out of the red haze holding a handheld radio like it was a grenade. It chirped, went dead, chirped again. He shoved it at me. "Captain Cross, Colonel Thorne." "He says it's urgent." The speaker crackled, and then Harlan Thorne's voice came through, calm in a way that made my stomach tighten. "Cross, I need your report cleaned up. Immediately. We have eyes." "I'm in the middle of your patient," I said, watching the quiet man's throat flutter like every breath had to be negotiated. My fingers pressed the vibrating gurney rail so hard it hurt. "This isn't about medicine," Thorne replied. "It's about control. Your note creates exposure. Remove it. In lane 2, the loud operator kept shouting. Someone stepped wrong and left a blood-dark boot print on the deck, then slid. The ship groaned, and the smell of burned insulation got stronger, like the whole place was sweating electricity. Thorne kept his tone even, like we were talking about inventory instead of lives. I looked at the grey label again, crooked emboss. That fraction a second lie, and it hit me like a smell. Somebody was moving supplies and moving stories at the same time. "Report to me," Thorne said. "Now." "You'll be relieved." 2 MPs stepped into the lane and made themselves a wall. One gave my badge lanyard a polite tug that still felt like a leash. "Ma'am." Colonel's orders. "Behind me." The monitor alarm clipped short, too fast, like a hand had reached over and silenced it. My eyes snapped the screen, but the MP's shoulder blocked my view. "Fine," I said, peeling my gloves off slow, 1 finger at a time. "But if he crashes while I'm walking, you can put that on your optics. Career exposure like this could end my record clean." The moment I stepped out of the red wash, the ship changed faces. Harsh fluorescence bleached the passageway outside the medbay, flattening everything into sickly honesty. The antiseptic smell fell off behind me and got replaced by metal, stale coffee, and that same ozone bite riding the vents. A camera fan whined somewhere overhead, steady and patient, like it had all night. A placard on the bulkhead, "No cell phones," stared at me like a threat disguised as policy. My damp scrubs cooled fast in the air-conditioned corridor, and the badge lanyard tugged at my neck every time the MP adjusted his pace. The hull groaned around us. Somewhere far off, a catapult slammed, and the vibration ran through my teeth. I tried not to picture the quiet man's monitor going silent too quickly. Tried and failed. We didn't make it 10 yards before a runner in khakis intercepted us, Thorne's aide, clipboard tucked like a shield. He didn't bother with hello. He just angled his body to herd me toward a side passage where the cameras were closer, the lights brighter, the corners fewer. A red recording indicator glowed above a door I hadn't noticed before. Everything about this hallway said the same thing: behave. The aide handed me a sealed envelope without meeting my eyes. The paper was too clean to belong near blood for your signature. "Ma'am, I didn't touch it. What is it?" "Chain of custody acknowledgement," he said. Too quick, like he'd practiced, his voice carrying that corporate, neutral edge, and a correction request. Correction. That word always meant erasure in nicer clothes. Colonel Harlan Thorne came around the corner with a clipped ID binder under his arm, moving like a man who'd learned to walk through mess without letting it stick. No villain cape? Just a uniform that fit, and eyes that stayed polite. "Captain Cross," he said, and then, lower, "You're making this harder than it needs to be. I'm not asking. I'm documenting." His jaw tightened. The camera fan kept whining. Thorne didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "We're under audit exposure," he said. "Everything you say becomes a record. Everything you write becomes a weapon. And right now, you handed them a loaded one. Who's them?" I kept my tone professional, almost bored. It was the only way to keep the anger from showing its teeth. He glanced up at the red recording light like it could hear him. Oversight. Media liaison. Whoever gets to decide what happened when this op hits daylight. He leaned in just enough that his breath smelled like burnt coffee. Control of narrative is control of mission. I watched his hands while he talked. Not because I thought he'd hit me, because hands tell the truth before mouths do. His grip on the binder was too tight. His thumb kept rubbing the edge of a routing slip like it was a worry stone. "Your order came through on a dead channel," I said. "Comms are being throttled." and my blood supply was tagged wrong. It wasn't tagged wrong, he said, instantly, too instantly. That was my hook. I let it hang. The aide shifted. Nervous. Thorne's eyes flicked to the sealed envelope again. The memo header on the top sheet had the right crest, but the routing line was off. An internal code that didn't match Medbay traffic. The timestamp was neat, printed, and a few seconds ahead of ship time. Same lie as the grey label. I pointed at it with one finger. This didn't come from my chain. It was pushed into it. Thorne's shoulders sank a fraction. So small you'd miss it if you weren't addicted to inconsistencies. You think I did that? He asked. And for the first time his voice carried something like fear, quiet, controlled, real, camera-aware in its risk math calculation. For a second, the corridor felt narrower. The fluorescent buzz got louder, or maybe my ears were just looking for something to punch. Thorne swallowed and chose his words like he was moving through a minefield. I'm telling you to understand the environment, he said, not to like it. Silas Vane has people watching every line item, every note, every deviation. He calls it accountability. He calls it purity. If I let your report stand as is, I'll be the one answering. You'll be the example they use to show the ship self-corrects. So that was it. Thorne wasn't the hand on the throttle. He was another throat being squeezed. I nodded once. Slow. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Then stop squeezing my patience to save your career. His eyes hardened again. Mask back on. You're going into that room, he said, tipping his chin toward the door with the red recording light. You're going to give a clean statement. You're going to comply publicly, or you're going to lose your access to my medbay. Effective immediately, the MP's hand hovered near his cuffs, not touching them yet. The aide held the envelope out like it was already decided. The ship groaned. Somewhere far off, another catapult slammed. I felt the badge lanyard tug at my neck, damp scrubs cold on my skin, and the weight of that tiny timestamp lie sitting on my tongue. I stared at the red light over the door, glowing like an eye that never blinked, and stepped forward anyway, because if I didn't, someone else would write the story for me. Audit exposure meant external reporting optics on casualty metrics. The supply alcove lived under fluorescence that couldn't commit. Flicker. Steady. Flicker again, like the ship was blinking at me. Air system throbbed low under everything, and the ozone smell sharpened near the bolted printer station. My scrubs were still damp from the medbay, cooling into a clammy film, and the badge lanyard tugged every time the escort behind me shifted. That was the new normal. Move. And you were moved. I was already inside the cage when my hands went to the shelf, cold metal, slick with sweat. Glove powder, grit, rows of sealed kits that looked reassuring until you stared too hard. I slid one forward and felt the label snag like a burr. Pale grey background. Faded black print. The emboss line sat off by a couple millimeters. The stamp punched crooked like a tired machine had hiccuped. I peeled the corner back slow. Adhesive stretched into thin, shiny strings that clung to my glove, then snapped. The paper fibres lifted with it, soft and gritty, and the ink smeared under my thumb. That wasn't normal for stock this close to active ops. Under the barcode, the timestamp line sat crisp as a confession. I glanced at the corridor clock out of habit. The printer's screen refreshed with a faint lag I could feel in my jaw. The timestamp on the kit sat ahead of ship time by a breathless fraction, 0.04 seconds, if you trusted the digits. Not 3 seconds. Not 5. Smaller. Meaner. The same kind of too clean wrong as the grey blood cooler label earlier. Different object. Same fingerprint. I didn't say it out loud. Saying it out loud made it a fight. Miller was 2 aisles over, pretending he wasn't watching. Clipboard in one hand, pen hovering like it didn't want to leave evidence. His eyes kept dipping to the camera dome in the corner, like it was a god he didn't believe in, but still feared. "You're not supposed to be in here without full sign-off," he said. Low. I lifted the escort slip. Thorne's aide had shoved at me. Clean, white paper. Clean, black print. Too tidy for a ship that was bleeding. Miller didn't step closer. Didn't step away. Middle ground was his religion. I pulled the inventory tablet toward me. The screen line scrolled, hiccuped, then settled into a routing line that didn't belong. Medbay stock. Authorization override. Recording. The log claimed this kit had been issued 20 minutes ago. It was still here. Seal unbroken. Cold in my hands. Physical stock, said one thing. Digital truth, said another. They weren't even arguing. They were living in different realities. I didn't accuse. Accusations were for people who wanted to feel clean on camera. I wrote the kit number on the inside of my glove cuff where no lens would catch it, then photographed the emboss misalignment with the tablet held low at my waist. A stupid little picture. The kind that ruined careers. Miller's throat bobbed like he wanted to swallow words back down, Val, he murmured. Closest he came to begging, don't. I looked at him and read the whole story in the way his shoulders pulled inward. He saw it too. He just chose safety anyway. I'm not doing anything, I said, which was technically true. I was collecting. The printer sighed. The fluorescence flickered, washing the aisle in a quick pulse of darkness. In that half-second, the tablet refreshed, and the routing line blinked, just for a beat, into something else. Medbay stock. Vein audit 47. Hold. My pulse didn't race. It narrowed. I snapped one more photo, routing line and timestamp together, then let the screen go dark. The escort cleared his throat behind me. A reminder with lungs. I slid the kit back, pressed the label down, smoothing it like I hadn't touched a live wire. As I turned to leave, my eyes tracked the shelf, row grey label, white label, grey label. Not random. A pattern. A signature. And signatures meant intent. Somewhere up the chain, somebody wasn't just moving supplies. They were moving time. It started as a hand bare, fast reaching for the wrong bin like it owned it. I was halfway out of the supply cage when a guy shoved past the escort's shoulder, head down, moving with that panicked purpose people get when they've decided rules are optional. The corridor was narrow and too bright, loud in a sterile way. Fluorescent buzz, camera fan whine. The ship's groan under everything like a bass note. The air smelled like disinfectant trying to cover smoke, and ozone still rode the vents. He went for a sealed envelope on the cart by the door, one of those two-person confirmation packages they used when they wanted paperwork to look moral. His fingers curled around it like it was a lifeline. The escort barked his name. The guy flinched, then yanked harder. The cartwheels squealed against the deck, high and ugly. My skin crawled at the sound. That cart shouldn't have moved without permission. I stepped between him and the cart without thinking. Not bravery. Habit. Stop, I said, clipped. The way you talk to a drunk in an ER before he swings. That's controlled stock. He snapped his eyes up. Not a cartoon villain, just a pressured human with incentives and sweat beading at his hairline in the cold. He glanced past me toward the camera dome, calculating. Ma'am, I'm authorized, he said, voice brittle. You're not, I answered, keeping my hands open for the lenses. Set it down. We do this the right way. He shook his head, tiny and frantic. The right way gets people killed, he whispered. And it landed hard because it wasn't wrong, just weaponized. The confirmation scanner on the bulkhead blinked, and then lagged. 3 seconds, 4, like it was deciding whether truth was worth the trouble. Procedure failed in real time. He tried to slip around my left side, using the cart as cover. I caught the envelope edge with my fingers and felt paper bite into glove powder, dry and gritty. He jerked back. The cart jolted. One wheel hopped and came down with a wet, metallic thunk that shivered through my boots. My body voted before my brain finished. I planted my foot, dropped my weight, and shoved the cart into him. No clean technique, just force and physics. Metal frame into ribs. His breath whoofed out. He stumbled, still clutching, and we collided into the bulkhead in a messy tangle. Cold steel hit my forearm, slick with sweat. The impact rattled my teeth. He clipped my shoulder with an elbow, not skilled, just desperate. Overhead the fluorescent flickered, turning us into jerky silhouettes for a heartbeat. The scanner finally chimed late, and the red recording indicator over a nearby door blinked brighter, like it approved as long as it was documented. A radio squelch cut off mid-syllable, like someone slapped the transmission dead. He skidded, knee-banging the cartwheel. He made a sound that was half pain, half rage, and then his eyes went glassy with something worse. He wasn't going to win, and he was going to be recorded losing. That was the real scar. He let go of the envelope, not because I was stronger, but because the camera was. It hit the deck and slid to a stop against my boot like an accusation. The escort hauled him back, cuffing him with careful haste. My breath went shallow. My hands tremored in tiny aftershocks as sweat cooled under my scrubs. I crouched and picked up the envelope with 2 fingers like it might bite. The seal had torn just enough to show a sliver of paper inside form header, routing line, printed neat as a grin. And there it was again. The same kind of timing lie, digits sitting ahead of ship time by a fraction my brain couldn't ignore. The guy stared at me with shame and anger, and I read the message in his face. Somebody promised him something if he got this out, and threatened him if he didn't. He looked away from the camera dome, shoulders collapsing half an inch, the shame hitting harder than the cuffs. The camera fan kept whining, patient as a predator. A log entry was being born right now, badge scan, incident trigger, a story that would travel faster than my reasons. I slid the envelope against my chest and felt the paper warm against damp fabric. Fear spiked for my own record. The system had predicted a storm and caused it. I stared at the grey label and felt my pulse narrow into one ugly point. This was the system as antagonist. No villain speech, no confession, just procedures doing their job under the wrong pressure. And now Oversight would have a new artifact. Another incident line. Another clean timestamp. Another excuse to lock me down tighter. I tasted metal in the back of my throat. Old adrenaline, old regret. And I knew the next phase wasn't optional anymore. If I wanted people alive, I'd have to investigate inside the cage, with cameras watching and clocks lying. The ship groaned under my feet like it agreed. The room they brought me to wasn't a room so much as a throat narrow, cold, lit by fluorescence that made my hands look guilty. The HVAC hum drilled into my teeth. Somewhere behind a panel, a fan whined like a camera that never sleeps. Paper lived in here. Paper and coffee, and that faint ozone bite the ship had been sweating all night. My scrubs were still damp from the corridor, cooling into a clammy film. And my badge lanyard tugged every time the escort behind me shifted. The air itself felt logged. An oversight rep was already seated. Civilian blouse, crisp ID clipped high, eyes that didn't blink wrong, risk-averse eyes, the kind that read numbers as people. She slid a folder toward me with 2 fingers, not offering placing. "Captain Cross," she said, voice flat with legalistic precision. "Record integrity review. Not a disciplinary hearing. Answer concisely." The folder smelled like toner and old hands. On top was a still frame. Me in the corridor, cart jammed sideways, a man half folded into the bulkhead. In the corner, the red recording dot like a tiny heartbeat. Under it, incident trigger, badge scan, time sync note. My gut didn't drop. It tightened. "Confirm," she said, tapping the image, "that you engaged physical contact with Petty Officer Reed. Confirm controlled stock was involved. Confirm chain of custody for the sealed envelope. Not why. Not motive. Just facts they could staple down." I kept my hands visible, palms on my thighs. "Yes," I said. "He reached for controlled stock." I stopped him. The envelope came up torn. Her pen scratched once small, satisfied. She flipped a page. Clean header, dirty routing line. My eyes snagged on it like a splinter. Med Bay stock, authorization override, recording. Beneath it, a timestamp sitting ahead of ship time by a fraction too neat to be accidental. "Your earlier triage note," she said, like we were discussing inventory shrink. The one Colonel Thorne attempted to correct. The one referencing irregular labeling and comms windows. She said comms windows like weather. "You are asserting a pattern." I didn't give her a speech. "I'm observing a mismatch," I said. "Labels, routing, time." She offered the normal explanations like bandages, clock drift, humidity, tired clerks, cheap rollers. For a second it almost sounded reasonable. Then I saw the crooked emboss in my head again, the grey label that shouldn't exist, the routing line that blinked vain audit, hold like a confession, and then pretended it hadn't. She slid a badge scanner across the table, the kind that demanded a second body to bless your existence. "Fail, secure posture," she said. "Effective immediately. 2-person confirmation required for all controlled releases. Your access is limited to triage lane inventory with Escort. Exceptions require oversight cosign." The scanner blinked and lagged 3 seconds, 4 before it chirped. My throat went dry. "That slows patient care," I said. Not pleading, just stating gravity. She didn't flinch. "That is the point," she replied. "When in doubt, lock." The turn came when she named exposure out loud. "This incident is now discoverable," she said. "Video, badge data, witness statements from the Escort. The envelope becomes a chain artifact." Chain artifact. Neutral words with teeth. If the narrative is that a captain used force in a controlled stock corridor under active operations without recorded authorization, she let the sentence hang like a noose with good paperwork. Command will clamp down. Hard. I watched her hands, the way her thumb rubbed the folder edge habit, not nerves. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "A deadline," she said, and slid one last page over. A form with a blank signature line. A time box printed in clean digits. "By 0400 ship time, submit an amended statement regarding the incident and your triage note. Factual. Limited. No speculation. If you cannot comply, your medbay access is suspended pending review." Suspended hit harder than any shout. Behind the wall the ship groaned, and I could feel minutes stacking up inside my gloves. That scanner lag 3 to 5 seconds wasn't just a nuisance now. It was policy. Time wasn't passing. Time was being used. Thorne paced, his risk math tone clipped for the camera. "We're protecting casualty, reporting optics under external audit pressure." The words hung, heavy in the recycled air. My prior case memory flashed reputation risk from a similar lag years ago. A restrained crack surfaced in my voice, barely. "Fail secure posture means lives wait. Policy defaults to fail. Secure when integrity is questioned." Correct. The scanner lag now had a name. Policy. Vent vibrations sat behind my molars, and the ozone smell lingered near the console. My scrubs clung, clammy. The badge lanyard tugged less now. Inside the prediction window, hands reached for shelves, rows of kits, labels reassuring until stared at. I slid one forward. Pale grey. Faded print. Emboss off by millimeters. Peel corner slow. Adhesive stretched, snapped. Ink smeared. Timestamp ahead by 0.04 seconds. Mina. Same fingerprint. Miller pretended not watching. "You're not supposed to." I lifted slip-clean paper. Inventory tablet scrolled to routing. Med Bay stock, vein audit 47, hold. Silas Vane's purity threshold blinked in. Pulse narrowed. Photo snapped. Escort cleared throat. Pattern. Signature. Intent. Somebody moving time. 28 minutes forecast. Mechanism as antagonist. The system positioned us. The consequence hit on schedule, and it hit stupidly. Not a fire. Not a missile. A latch that chirped green and drifted back to red like it regretted trying. In the triage lane, a corpsman called for a specific kit TXA and pressure infuser voice cracking. The cart arrived wrong. Wrong bin. Wrong label. Pale grey tape. Emboss punched. Crooked by that same tired 2mm hiccup. The monitor beeped and then dropped out for a beat, like somebody slapped it quiet at the worst second. 2-person confirmation, someone yelled. And the scanner lagged 3 seconds, 4, 5 before it even chimed. The patient on the gurney wasn't loud. He was quiet. Eyes open, not tracking. My mouth went dry. My hands moved anyway, because hands don't get to argue when rules start killing. By the time confirmation came through, the window had closed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough to turn a save into a scramble, and a scramble into something you couldn't rewind. The corpsman looked at me like I'd been holding the answer back. The escort looked at me like I'd predicted a storm and caused it. I stared at the grey label and felt my pulse narrow into one ugly point. This was the system as antagonist. No villain speech, no confession, just procedures doing their job under the wrong pressure. And now, oversight would have a new artifact, another incident line, another clean timestamp, another excuse to lock me down tighter. I tasted metal in the back of my throat, old adrenaline, old regret, and I knew the next phase wasn't optional anymore. If I wanted people alive, I'd have to investigate inside the cage, with cameras watching and clocks lying. The ship groaned under my feet like it agreed. What comes after the forecast? The first thing I noticed was the wrong light. Not red, not green. A steady amber LED above the medbay supply hatch, glowing like a warning that had lost its instructions. It should only have been active after a query. I hadn't touched anything. No badge. No scan. Still, the light breathed steadily, patient, like it knew I was already late. The corridor air was cold enough to pull heat from sweat. HVAC hum drilled into my teeth until my jaw ached. The escort stayed half a step behind me, close enough that my badge lanyard tugged every time he shifted his weight. Somewhere overhead, a camera fan whined with the thin persistence of something that never blinked. The ship wasn't loud. It was quiet in a way that felt archived. Inside triage, sound flattened. No PA, no chatter. Just gloves snapping on, boots scuffing, a distant metallic ping cooling in the hull. A corpsman leaned over a gurney, taping a pressure dressing. Tape pulled skin hair by hair, slow and exacting, like it wanted payment. I bent to listen to a chest, waited for something honest breath, rhythm while my head ran a parallel track, grey labels, crooked emboss, the same fractional timestamp sitting ahead of ship time, a signature pretending to be noise. The next patient came in quiet again, different face, same stillness behind the eyes. The monitor tried to chirp, then cut itself off mid-beep. I felt for a pulse. Thin, slippery. TXA, I said, calm for the cameras, flat enough to sound procedural. The corpsman scanned his badge. We waited. 3 seconds stretched. 4, 5. The scanner blinked like it was deciding whether we were allowed to intervene. The corpsman glanced at me, apology already forming. I didn't raise my voice. Yelling only fed the log. When the drawer finally opened, the kit looked right. That was the trick. Clean seal, neat print, comforting geometry. I peeled the label corner anyway. Adhesive stretched into glossy threads before snapping back. Ink smeared under my thumb. My pulse narrowed. Routing line. Audit hold. Same handwriting as before. I didn't say it. I wrote the kit number inside my glove cuff, where no lens would catch it. I watched the escort's eyes flick to the camera dome. Watched the corpsman's mouth tighten when the drawer lagged again. The system wasn't accusing us. It was positioning us. Authority arrived quietly. A runner in khakis stepped into the lane, holding a printed form with both hands. "Comms blackout," he said. 2-person rule. All controlled stock requires witnessed confirmation. His tone was calm, adult, professionally unbothered. He handed the form to my escort first. I took it when they let me. Warm paper. Toner smell sharp enough to bite. Header clean. Signature field clean. The timestamp wasn't. It sat ahead of the lane clock by the same ugly sliver. "Protect the mission," the runner added. "Protect," while we waited 5 seconds for a draw. Then I saw the part that mattered. Witness field already filled. My name. Typed. Clean. Escort's badge number 2. Compliance logged before action occurred. Paperwork leading the event by the nose. A soft sound from the gurney cut through everything. Barely a moan. My hands went back to work. Airway. Breathing. Circulation. The runner started reciting procedure. I cut him off. "Hold the form," I said. "Witness with your eyes." The escort hesitated. Radios were dead. Dead air pressed in. Cameras watched. I crossed the line small. Not heroic. I snapped the seal and worked. Tape tore with a sound that went straight into my teeth. Gloves squeaked against plastic. Sterile chemical bite. Ozone. Numbers argued with skin temperature and capillary colour. The patient pinked up by a fraction, like he'd decided to stay. Behind me, a pen scratched anyway. When it was stable enough, I lifted the form. "This was pre-filled," I said. Before I touched anything. The runner flinched. The escort leaned closer, pupils tightening. "System generated," the runner said. "For speed." Speed. Down the corridor, a magnetic latch clicked. Final. The amber LED flipped green. Cold sweat slid down my spine. A man stepped out of the doorway. Oversight adjacent. Not the top, but close enough. He held a sealed pouch with fresh red tape, stamp still glossy. "Captain Cross," he said, polite as a blade. "You're required in oversight now." He held the pouch like a verdict. I held nothing but questions. The room smelled like paper, burnt coffee, and recycled air stripped of warmth. Fluorescence buzzed overhead. I sat with my hands on the table because hands off the table read as intent. The escort stood behind me, breathing quietly, present in the way a restraint is present. 2 oversight reps sat across like furniture. Neutral faces. Folders squared to the table edge. Thorn stood instead of sitting, as if vertical space still counted for something. Cameras watched. The walls hummed. The red seal went first. Tape tore slowly, fibers popping in small, irritated sounds that went straight into my molars. A laminated slip slid out, then a printout, still warm from the machine. "This is the record," one of them said, legalistic tone classifying directly. "Not explanation. Declaration. Badge scans. Drawer access. Witness confirmation. My name. Clean. Time-stamped." I didn't argue. I laid artifacts on the table instead. "Witness field was populated before contact," I said. "Directive timestamp leads ship time." I tapped the digits. That same fractional offset. Mean. Precise. She didn't deny it. She nodded once. "Clock anomalies under load," she said, corporate neutral softening. "System behavior. Weather. Gravity." Thorn's jaw tightened. "It repeats," I said. Same handwriting. I slid the photos forward. Crooked emboss. Grey labels. Audit routing. Torn envelope. The rep leaned in just enough to see. Her pen hovered. No surprise crossed her face. "You violated procedure," she said. "Created exposure." I created a save. I stopped there. Emotion was bait. The open loop sat heavy between us. What would this cost? She slid a dark striped card across the table. Embedded chip. "Temporary clearance," she said. "Audit view. 1 terminal. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. A ration." Thorne finally spoke. "This isn't a reward. It's containment." He didn't look at me. He looked at the camera. "If routing integrity is compromised, we need eyes on it." Quietly. His voice carried authority constrained by camera, awareness. The trap revealed itself when the second item landed on the table. A body camera. Matte black. The magnetic click when it latched sounded like a gavel. It warmed against my chest like a brand. "Monitoring condition," she said. "Live audio. Live video. Escort remains. 2-person rule remains. Scope violation terminates clearance." They weren't opening space. They were tightening it with better optics. Thorne met my eyes for half a second. Dirty authority reversal. Take it or be crushed cleaner later. "I want the override logged under my name," I said. She nodded. "Already done." Another printout slid forward. "Access rule exception. Issued. Captain Cross. Timestamp ahead by that same fraction. Physical, laminated, permanent." "You understand," she said. "If this burns, it burns you." "I understand." The chip was cold in my palm. The escort clipped the camera to my scrub top. Magnet snapped. Heavy. Sweat pooled beneath it. HVAC hum drilled into my teeth. 15 minutes, she repeated. Thorne stepped aside. For a moment the doorway looked like freedom, until I remembered doors were just permissions with hinges. He leaned close. "Do this clean," he murmured. Survival advice, not kindness. Down the corridor, a latch clicked. A panel hissed open. Dead air watched. I stood. Clearance active. Timer already counting down. And followed my escort toward the terminal they had chosen, because the choice was already made. And whatever I touched next could not be undone. The terminal answered my escort's badge like it was doing us a favor. First my swipe, then his. The reader blinked, thought about it, and finally clicked green, with that tiny delay that always made my jaw tighten. A countdown bar appeared on the screen, 15 minutes of borrowed air, while the body camera on my chest warmed my skin like a brand. The room smelled like toner, and laminate, and old coffee trapped in recycled oxygen. My gloves squeaked when I set my palms on the table edge, sweat cooling under the cuffs. Hook right where it hurt. Clearance in my hands, and the ship already deciding what it would charge me for using it. I didn't chase a story. I chased repeatable artifacts. The audit view loaded in stutters, the cursor lagging a half beat behind my finger, grey label kit numbers. Issued. Timestamps ahead of ship time by that same thin 0.04 second lie. Routing lines that didn't match the physical world. The system was consistent in the way a con is consistent, never sloppy, never loud. A radio squelch tried to break through and got cut off mid-syllable, like someone had slapped comms dead. Then the triage intercom coughed out a single line before it died too. "Lane 1 pressure infuser now." The words weren't panic. They were a timer, open loop, sitting in my throat. If I stayed in this room, what would I be forced to sacrifice out there? The entry that mattered wasn't the one with the biggest red flag. It was the one that looked clean. A controlled stock release, scheduled inside my clearance window, witness field pre-filled with my escort's badge ID, and a note that read like it had been copied from some template nobody wanted to own. The printer beside me woke up with a soft motor whine. I hovered my finger over print packet, already feeling the paper fibers and the glue and the ink, something I could hold up later and say, "This is real." The oversight rep stood in the doorway, silent as furniture, eyes flicking between me and the camera dome. 7 minutes? she said. Not help. A boundary. The countdown bar kept draining. Then the ship made the trade-off ugly on purpose. Lane 1's monitor beeped twice, stuttered, and dropped into a gap so wrong it felt physical. A corpsman's voice punched through the comms blackout for half a breath. Scanners lagging, and got eaten again. I watched my escort's face. He'd heard it. He looked like a man realizing he'd been written into someone else's paperwork. I could finish the packet, lock in the proof, and maybe keep the evidence chain alive. Or I could leave the room and try to keep a living person alive, with whatever was within arm's reach. No third option. The system had already shut the door on do both. I left the proof on the counter and moved. With me, I told my escort, because I couldn't go anywhere alone now. The corridor air hit cold and metallic, HVAC hum drilling into my teeth, and my sweat turned into a chill under my scrubs. Triage smelled like disinfectant, trying to cover smoke, ozone riding the vents like a burn. Lane 1 was chaos in tight spaces, hands, tape, suction, a gurney rail vibrating under my grip. The patient was quiet in the worst way, eyes open but not tracking. The drawer for controlled stock blinked red. 2-person, the corpsman said, voice cracking, and I felt that familiar rage. A rule built for safety that now acted like a guillotine. I slammed my badge to the reader. My escort mirrored me, and we waited while the system pretended to think. 1 second. 2, 3, 4. The patient's skin was tacky under my fingertips, cap refill slow, lips going pale at the edges. The latch finally clicked, metallic and reluctant, and the drawer slid out wrong bin. Wrong label. Pale grey tape, crooked embossed like a tired punch. The signature, again. The binary choice snapped shut. Demand the correct kit through full procedure, or use what I had and own the deviation. I chose with my hands. I tore the grey label open, adhesive stretching into shiny strings that snapped against my glove. Pressure bag, I said. Wide open. I'll ride the line. We bought seconds. Not victory. Seconds. The patient's colour shifted by a shade, the monitor finding a rhythm again. And the cost landed somewhere else, because the ship didn't give you gifts without taking interest. Lane. 2 loud casualty, still fighting a minute ago, went silent, while everyone's attention was pinned. A beep stuttered, then turned into a flat tone that made my stomach drop. Someone yelled my name. Someone yelled for confirmation. I got there fast and still felt late, like the delay was in my bones now. Pupils fixed. Skin cooling under harsh light. Compressions started, then slowed. His chest no longer rose to meet my palms. Skin already tacky, cooling under the red lights. The monitor flatlined long, unbroken tone that drilled deeper than any scream. I counted 5 more compressions anyway, knowing the rhythm was only for the log now, then stopped when the medic doing them realized what he was touching wasn't coming back. A cold weight settled behind my ribs. No room left for anything else. I pulled the sheet up over his shoulders with hands that didn't tremble until afterward. No speech, no catharsis. Just the ugly professional finish of death in a place that kept pretending paperwork was the only real thing. When I turned back toward the terminal bay, the oversight rep was already there, holding a red roll of seal tape like it was a tool. She laid it across the printed packet I hadn't claimed in time, pressed it down, and the tear made my teeth itch. Stamp. Thud. The pouch swallowed the pages. Containment action, she said, calm. Clearance revoked. My escort's hand hovered near my elbow again, polite, guiding. The door behind the rep clicked shut with a magnetic finality, and I understood the cliffhanger without anyone naming it. I wasn't walking into a victory lap. I was walking into a box. Before the rep sealed the packet, I pressed my thumb into the glove cuff, writing one last number in blood pressure ink only I could feel. The seal tape tore slow, like it enjoyed the sound. A dry rip, paper fibers complaining under the adhesive, and then the stamp came down thud flat and official. The room stayed cold anyway, HVAC, humming at that tooth drill frequency that made my molars ache. Light stuttered once and recovered, like the ship blinking through a headache. The oversight rep slid the sealed pouch into a tray and didn't look at me when she did it. That was the neutral closure. No drama, just a file becoming a wall. Open loop sat right there in the air. What price did authority pay for this? And how much of it would ever be visible? They walked me into a small administrative bay that smelled like toner, stale coffee, and disinfectant residue that never quite left the vents. One table bolted down. 2 chairs, camera domes centered like an eye. My escort stood behind me, close enough to ensure compliance, far enough to pretend he wasn't part of it. Thorne arrived a minute later, not rushing, not warm, the kind of calm that was really risk math. He glanced at the sealed pouch, then at the oversight rep, then at the camera. Always the camera. He didn't apologize. He didn't deny. He just took his place in the frame. The rep opened a folder and slid one page toward me. The paper rasped against metal, dry as bone. Containment posture, she said. Compartmented access. Monitoring ongoing. Her words were procedural, but they landed like restraints. You remain in medical operations due to expertise requirement. You will not access controlled stock without escort. You will not access audit terminals. You will not generate independent reports. All notes routed through command review. Each will was a latch clicking shut somewhere out of sight. Thorne didn't argue. He signed the command acknowledgement line when she turned it to him, pen scratching soft and final. Whatever price he paid, it wasn't a public burn. It was a shorter leash and a longer paper trail. External oversight on media exposure tightened everything. I kept my hands flat on the table, fingers spread so nobody could say I was fidgeting. Sweat cooled under my scrubs, and the body camera on my chest warmed one spot like a coin. Your triage deviation is recorded as medically necessary, the rep said. Not praise. A classification. Your clearance misuse is recorded as non-compliance. Misuse. Like I'd stolen time instead of trying to stop someone from bleeding out while a reader lagged. Thorne's jaw flexed once, and I courted anger he couldn't afford to show. He leaned forward just enough to drop his voice, maybe. You're staying, he said, because we need you. Need was colder than respect. He straightened again, putting his command voice back on. This matter is closed. Turn hit when the rep tapped the body camera with one gloved finger. Audio buffer retention is set to 72 hours, she said. Any attempt to remove or obstruct will be treated as tampering. Not just doors and drawers. My own breath. My own silence. The ship taking the last private inch and calling it safety. I felt my pulse try to spike and forced it back down, slow even. Understood, I said, because the cameras loved that word. The rep sealed the folder with another strip of tape rip, then stamped it thud, and the whole room seemed to exhale like it had been waiting for the official end. Clearance revoked risked my career record. They released me back into duty the way you put a tool back in a drawer. Carefully, with restrictions, because it's still useful. Escort at my shoulder. Doors opening only after the reader blinked, lagged, and decided. The corridor air was cold and metallic, fluorescent buzz riding the hum. In triage, the smells were worse disinfectant layered over smoke. Ozone in the vents like a warning the ship couldn't speak out loud. I stopped at the first cart, pulled on fresh gloves, and did the small ritual I could still own. I wrote a kit number inside my glove cuff in tiny ink where no lens would catch it, pressed the latex to set the smear, and stepped forward because the system was still here, and now it was watching me work. The reader blinked again, same fractional delay that had started everything. Containment had walls now. He still had my hands,